Hey, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I am Nerder Doug, and today we are doing a special Thursday live chat following Wizards Presents with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Dave, how you doing today?
Pretty good. I was excited by all the announcements, and they really came through too because I was unable to go to the press briefing, but they sent me all the stuff, including a recording of all the events and everything in advance. So we've had a chance to look over all the stuff in preparation. We figured since it's technically supposed to be live now, we'll talk about the what I thought was the most exciting part of the whole thing is one D&D.
Yeah, so
And it is live now. I just refreshed it, so totally cool. We're not
we're
in
not
any kind
breaking any
no.
NDAs or anything.
Yeah, so if
Nice.
you want to follow along, down in the description, there's a link to D&D Beyond where you can claim the PDF of, let me get the name right here, Unearthed Arcana.
Character origins.
Yes, Character Origins, which is the official playtest, the public playtest for one D&D, which is what the evolution of D&D is called, coming out in 2024. There's also a link to a post at Nerdarchy, the website down there, with a lot of details, including their release schedule and what one D&D means, including quotes from Christopher
And
Perkins and also.
I know we're going a lot of digital with where the way Wizards of the Coast is going, and just gaming in general. But there's still some of us that still like to play in person and roll physical dice, and the best physical dice to roll are from Easy Roller Dice. Whether it's your first set of dice or your 1 millionth set of dice, Easy Roller Dice. We got a special promo code link in the description for a 25% off for your first order. So if you want to check that out and support the sponsor, that would be awesome. But with that, let's jump into it and talk about it now. I've only really had a chance to look at the character origins. You checked out the presentation stuff, so the other stuff that's going on. So they're going to be doing the live play test. And one of the funny things about Nerdarchy is the fact that like we are kind of viewed as these 5e guys, 5e players, but we never took part or even knew they were creating a fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons until after we started doing Nerdarchy. We had been playing other games and bouncing back and forth, and even in the very early stages of Nerdarchy, we started playing Pathfinder when in I believe it was the July 4th weekend of 2014, I stumbled across the playtest, or not the playtest rules, but the basic rules that they were released for free for fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, hey guys, they made a new Dungeons and Dragons, and it's kind of history from there. But this time we're actually aware, and we may just have to get in on this play test action. I see things that I like, I see things that I don't like already, and we can go over it. So like
Yeah,
Doug said,
that's what's cool about them doing these playtest things is that you can let them know the things you like and you don't like it real quick. In my experience, it was totally opposite of yours. The first time I went to Gen Con was in 2013 or 14, whenever D&D Next was coming out. And so like the whole event was just about that. And like there was tons of games going on, and I received a copy of Ghosts of Dragonspear Castle, which you can't see because of my green screen thing, which was like a pretty thick, it's like 200 and something page long thing using those rules, those original ones. And I quickly went home and put a group together to play through that. So this is exciting in that same way to me, except amped up because like now I'm like in the biz. It's my job to do this stuff. So it's like
well, I just
even
find it funny that it's titled Ghost something or other, and you can't show up because of the green screen, so it shows like a ghost in and of itself. And Anpu 42. The one thing I can find is the PDF. So the link should be in the description, and then it should take you to D&D Beyond where it says claim claim the PDF.
mm-hmm.
Let's see. You said it was live, right?
Yep.
So it should be over
You
there.
have to
Yep.
go through a few things, but it's like click here and here's the thing and blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
yeah.
But
I see I see download PDF when I scroll to the bottom of the
yes,
screen
yep.
there. So it should be there for you to grab if you want to take a look at that. Um, so we get 21 pages here, right? So there's a decent
Yeah.
amount to start with. It's not really enough to begin playtesting, I would say, but it's a good enough to kind of give you kind of an idea where the game is going. And they start
Mm-hmm.
off basically by giving you races, right? Giving you a couple of the races and the backgrounds. So that kind of sets the tone. Like they stripped out the stat adjustments from your races. They moved them to backgrounds, which is funny because on our video planning sheet, like I have a video idea to kind of discuss some of this stuff in an upcoming video. So I don't know if I'll get into any of that here, but we'll look at what they do have.
I'd say two things to note about this section too that I noticed is right off the bat, origin is sort of like a combination of your race and your background, right? So it says after choosing your character's class, it's time to consider their origin, which consists of answering 3 questions. What's their race, their background, and their language, which I thought was just an interesting kind of like those, it's like your class is one thing, and then the other 2 parts, which are still in the game, are sort of like combined into this melange. And the other thing I thought was interesting was how it included the sort of like how the sausage is made, right? Which just as a third party creators ourselves, and for DMs out there who want to make stuff, but it's a little different when you make like products, right? It was sort of like the nuts and bolts of like, well, what does that mean? It's like it has like the race trait, what that means, and what those components are in each of the things.
So I thought it was weird that you can now be a 2-foot-tall human.
Why not? Right?
I guess, but it is odd. But you cannot be a 2-foot-tall dragonborn.
Why not?
Well, because like if you look under the traits, I'm just poking fun a little bit. This doesn't really matter that much, but like under traits for human, the size is medium, 4 to 7 foot tall, or small, 2 to 4 foot tall.
Okay.
And so from your actual race, you're going to get several traits, and they all work like that now. And human is still the feat race. And at this point, it looks like with one D&D, feats are not going to be an optional part of the game anymore. They're being baked into your into the race in this case. They're going to also be baked into then you'd be essentially a quarterling, I think so. Also,
you'd be a little person.
Yeah. Also being baked, the feats are also baked into the backgrounds. Well, it's funny because the halfling starts at 3 foot tall, so you can be a smaller human than you are a halfling.
Hey, if that's somebody's fantasy, go for it, man.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that doesn't matter. I just thought it was kind of weird.
I like that it let off with the human, and there's a lot to like too. Like you said, it's still a feat race, but it's specific feat in one case, and also it tells us something that we noticed throughout this whole document, which is incorporating inspiration in a much more fresh way, which is awesome because it's a cool part of the game.
So if you look at if you're looking at the human traits, there's a couple things you can pick out right away. Some of the races you're going to be able to pick medium or small, depending. That's whatever you want to make it. And then the humans get an ability called resourceful, which you gain inspiration whenever you finish a long rest. Like you said, more inspiration in the game. We're seeing that right away with the humans. Skillful, you gain proficiency with 1 skill. That's kind of the same as the variant human. But then the versatile is you get the skilled feat or another first level feat. And that's another thing, like feats are leveled now. So I don't know if they're going to all be leveled, but the ones that they're showing us are either generic or they're leveled.
Right. And I believe that in general, they're going to be organized by that, not alphabetical order, which I know a lot of people asked for. So, so you could just look at like, well, what's available to me now? And that,
that would make sense. I would prefer that instead of like one of the problems that, I have with spells sometimes is like, I just want the spells for the thing that I am, right? Or the level that I'm looking at. So from older editions, they would organize them that way. And I felt it was easier to find what you were looking for.
Right.
In some ways. So
one of the things that most caught my attention from the video about 1D&D was Chris Perkins. That I greatly respect that guy, but he said his one of his personal goals for this 1D&D was revamping the Dungeon Master's Guide, and he described a lot of like just structural changes like that in general to make it just more friendly to players and Dungeon Masters. So that was cool to hear. Just because like I know a lot of people again are just about the organization of books and how and the information in them is they take into account. So I thought that was cool.
So I don't know if they're getting rid of Asimars or or if they're adding a new race, because we have an Ardling that very much looks like an Asimar, with some minor differences. One, whether you're basically, is it a neutral plane, a lawful plane, or a chaotic plane? They're all good planes. That doesn't mean that's the alignment you have to be, but that's what those planes are associated with, which actually affects like the abilities you get. They get the angelic flight, and also the weird thing is they have animal heads now instead of people heads.
I love it. I think again, I like when they sort of like create or draw on, just like D&D, lore, right? Like a lot of the celestial creatures, like I forget, isn't there like a dog-headed celestial?
There is. One of them's a ball of light, and
so it's like, hey, maybe in the D&D multiverses, just being celestial comes with having an animal head. So I'm all here for it.
And the tieflings are arranged the same way. They don't have animal heads, but it's like, what kind of lower plane connection do you have? Is it lawful? Is it neutral? Is it chaotic? You have different abilities that go with them, and also both of them are going back to the old edition where they were more like plane touched races, and somewheres in your ancestry you had a infernal being, demonic being, or a celestial being in there, and just every once in a while, because of that, boom, you're an Ardling or you're a Tiefling.
I like that approach. I like that as the default approach more than considering like there's just like, a whole city of Aasimar or Tieflings, right? Which you could totally do if if that's the flavor you want. But it's like just the baseline is that it's just like a quirk of your bloodstream.
It seems like better lore for the D&D verse all overarchingly, as opposed to like, Modius made a deal with this one group of people, and now we have Tieflings,
right?
Now that would be a cool story, but I don't think that should be the origin of Tieflings.
Yeah, right.
And also,
right.
I like the idea of having different ancestries for them, not just all the same.
And often the fantasy is that is that you're just like kind of a unique individual. So it's like weird to think that there's just like, where I come from, everybody is, red skin, devil horn, and a bifurcated tail or whatever,
Yeah. I feel like Dragonborn. So Dragonborn, this one's a little weird in the directions they've gone. One is like they changed Dragonborn with fizz bands and in my opinion made them better.
Yeah.
But then they like reverted them back to the way they were in the player's handbook when it comes to their breath weapon. And in some ways, but they did give them dark vision, so I'm happy about that. They're probably tired of us making fun of Dragonborn for not having dark vision.
Did they have dark vision? I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, they've got dark vision now. And their breath weapon does less damage, but they can do it more often. Depending on how often you short rest, I guess, compared to how it was before. But
which there are still going to be in the game. It mentions short rest.
Yeah, short rest is still going to be in the game. But the cool thing they did in fizz bands, especially if you're a martial character, you could ditch one of your attacks as part of the attack action to use your breath weapon.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet.
Which it is basically never worth it to ditch all your attacks to use your breath weapon as a martial character. Yeah. But one of them, sure.
And hey, I think it's always fair to keep in mind too that and I would use like say our Tuesday night games is a great example of this. It's like, sometimes the fun of the story and the way you play your game, you might not need every single attack to be maximized, and it's more cool and fun and rewarding to waste them and just be a fire breathing dragon guy, right? So like that might be relevant to you. There was a question we have a perfect answer for in the post that I wrote earlier today. It's from Geek Ledger. It says, do you think this initiative is a relaunch of D&D I know they said they're not doing editions moving forward, but that could just be in naming conventions like 1 D&D, 2 D&D. I do not. I'll refer to the quote from the thing, but I mean, they're just kind of like have ownership literally and figuratively of D&D, and I'll let Chris Perkins say. He said, "We did a smart thing with 5th edition by listening to the fans, and what came out of that process was a system that is stable, that is well loved, that incorporates the best elements of earlier editions. Now that we have that, we are no longer in the position where we think of D&D as an edition. It's just D&D." So, I totally get what he's saying too, where it's just like, yeah, even if they modified it, maybe to your point, it's like maybe they would have D&D 2 down the road. I think it would still be compatible in the way it would still be based on that same thing. It might just offer like, going back to the D&D next days, like new modular content that's like, you want to play D&D like this? Here you go. You want to play D&D like this? Here you go. You want to play old school D&D? Then you can play D&D, 2014 edition.
I feel like part of it too is just comms, right? Like every edition of D&D, when they come out with a new edition, the last thing they want you to think about is the last edition. So like it's always about just like they don't want you to really think about the editions per se. And with 5th edition more so than any of the others. So they're just because it's not like they use 5th edition as much as everybody else does. Like they always try and say just Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, right.
Right. Where us as the community, we're like, no, we need to differentiate because I've played like 6 versions of this game. So.
Right. And I could totally see, that's a long view too. I mean, you think about it, the game's around in 100 years where people are like, I'm playing like 25th, it just get cumbersome to say, right? I thought, and we were talking about this before we went live too, which Perkins also sort of explained. He explained how in 2024, we'll get new versions of the game, we know, but reflective of where the game is presently. And that's a lot about what we were talking about before we went live, which is just like, and I even recognize it myself, and I'm sure you do too. It's just like, we just play different. So it's like, the fact that like a lot of these options we'll see as we go through this get a lot of spells or powers, or you start off really powerful. It's like, well, we all do that anyway, every time we like start a 3rd level, because it's boring to be 1st level and all those things. It's like, well, yeah, because it's cool. It's fun to have a lot of cool stuff to do. Even I was resistant to that for a while, but it's like, that's just the way people play. People are open-minded to like power trip fantasies and stuff. Ever since the mainstream pop culture knew who like Thanos was, as like an old school comic fan, like, yeah, you could make stories about anything. And if it's good enough, people are on board. It's not like too weird. So I'm all for it.
So, Alexander, I don't like the change. I like the lore that tieflings are descended from humans who worshipped Asmodeus. But see, when you have a broader description for how that race works, you can still do that in that broad description. Like, this sect of tieflings worshipped Asmodeus and made this deal. Now, that's how they came. But if you want to play a tiefling who, I don't know, someone in your lineage was the concubine, the Demigorgon, right? And now, like, that blood, the blood of Demigorgon flows through your bloodlines, and every once in a while a tiefling pops out. You can totally, do that too. So I think it makes it broader and easier to work with.
Yeah, right. There's just more options. I get that, it sometimes can be challenging to just, come to terms. Like, again, I've had these challenges too, of just like come to terms with like, well, what I view as the cool thing, it's like that's there, but there's also this other thing, and it's like kind of just maybe you're apprehensive for like other people to be like, well, I think this thing's cooler. I want to play this kind of character, and it's like that just doesn't fit your imagination, but it's just going to happen.
So one of the things I saw someone mention, and Zurgrim, dwarves get tremor sense, happy days. So stone cunning is now tremor sense that you can kind of activate, which feels a little weird just because I've been playing D&D so long, and stone cunning has always been about like dwarves just know stonework and how it works, and they're good at spotting it, and they can tell who made it or if something looks off. which also would be a very cultural thing. I feel like
Mhm.
because it's how
Like
they grew
maybe
up,
the dwarves in my world don't live under the ground, sort of thing.
right? But now they have tremor sense instead.
Well, I can see why that is for two reasons. One, it gives a mechanical benefit because to something which people are much more likely to engage with. And maybe that'll prompt them to think about, why do I have tremor sense? I mean, people that aren't gonna just like, sweet, I got this power now, weren't gonna anyway. And two, it's just like, well, that sort of, gives I can see why that it's weird because it's like it does like half remove the cultural aspect of just like, well, the reason they notice things about stone is, or tied into why they have like this actual sense about it. It's not just they
I
know
will.
about
I
it. It's
will
like, no,
say.
I'm connected to the stone.
I will say it's kind of funny, and I do like the idea now when the drow go to use their little "I fight in a cloud of darkness" trick. Dwarves are like, "Suck it." I don't need
And
those
that's
stinking
cool.
eyes.
That's one of my that's something I particularly enjoy about the things in games in general is like when the mechanics intersect with that narrative. It's like, well, dwarves and drow are often considered enemies in the Underdark, right? And it's like that gives more credence to it. It's like, they wouldn't just get slaughtered by drows because they have superior magical ability. It's like, well, that doesn't matter to the dwarves because they don't need to see.
So I will say it definitely seems like power creep, right? For sure. Um,
I would
just
have said that
because
once, but I just, I mean, it's like, I would have, I used to think like, yeah, and that's a bad thing. Now it's like, yeah, who cares? It's like, it's fun to have more powers. I like having them.
well, and that's true too. Like it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's only bad if you don't want it, right? If you're like,
Mhm.
yes, I want more things, that's so cool, then it's a good thing. But if you're like, oh, I don't like the direction that the game's going, everything's more powerful, then it's a bad thing. So
Right.
it's however you view it. Now, Forge wise, this is
Yeah.
one of the issues I do have with where they're going with
Yes.
things.
100%. It just seems, I'll
Your
just say it, it
divine
just seems
creator,
straight up dumb.
your divine creator gave an uncanny affinity to working with stone or metal. You gain tool proficiencies with two of the following options of your choice, and it lists a bunch of tools. And Wizards is going. They're like trying. They're gonna break their own backs, trying to bend over so far in order to make sure nothing is cultural, because that's bad or has a stigma or whatever. And there may be some actual reasons for wanting to move away from that direction. But again, the way they're doing it to me is stupid. I agree. Monolithic races is dumb, right? It doesn't make sense. Why would every dwarven culture
Right.
be exactly the same on every single world, on every continent, across the multiverse? Makes no sense. But I feel like there are better ways to address it than going, the crazy wizard did it or the god
Yeah.
did it in this case.
Yeah. We talked about that beforehand too, of just like, what, they have this sort of, drop, drag and drop, origin creation thing. Why not just have like cultural things,
Yeah.
physical things, or magical, or even just like, you know, even more simply and generally in those breakdowns, it's like each origin gets like a tool proficiency. Here's some reasons why you might have it. It's part of your culture. It's a connection to a god.
Like,
It's because your people have a magical, connection to this. Just give some like, instead of baking them in, just be like, here's a bunch of things where any of these things could be true of your idea of dwarves.
it's like it is like the problem is that you know races in D&D are equated to these are just different flavors of human, right? Instead of being different, completely different species.
I mean, I try to look at it in a different way when I'm
Well,
playing.
the way people that have problems with the way I feel like the way people that have a problem with the way they're presented want them all to just be different versions of human.
Yes,
And,
yes,
and
yes.
a
I see what
minotaur
you're
and
saying.
a human and a centaur, they're all just the same.
Right.
But even on every level,
Yeah.
culturally they could all be the same. Physiology, they could all be the same, but it makes no sense because even in the real world, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Some creatures have different gifts than others, and that's just the way it is. They're good at different things. Minotaurs are huge and powerful. They're going to be stronger than halflings, which they're probably not going to be as quick and nimble as a halfling. And centaurs are going to have a problem climbing trees because they're built like a horse. So like they've gone so far to try and get away from those things that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it would seem more in line with like making it more open-ended, like we were just saying, to like just have like sort of like a pick and choose sort of, not only different kinds of traits, but like reasons why your character might have those traits, whether it's your individual character, because, maybe the dwarves because again, it's like maybe you're playing in a standard D&D setting, right? And dwarves, like, they live in the mountain, they all work forges and all that stuff, but your dwarf, grew up like, at sea or something, because he was like traded in some sort of treaty to like a pirate kingdom or whatever, right? So it's like, well, you wouldn't know, why would you know how to use a forge and all that just because you're a dwarf? So having those grab bag elements, it's like you can still have those traditional things, and dwarves are like that, but your dwarfship is different. Or maybe all the dwarves in your setting are like that, and now you just have an easy way to apply that to all of them. It's like whenever there's dwarf NPC, they have this, they're stronger or whatever.
Yeah, why not? Be like, here's a standard fantasy dwarf, right? But if you wanted to do it differently, here's some other things to change out. Zorgrim, I agreed on the Forge wise. I think cultural emphasis on crafting would make more sense than a divine gift. And also, we were talking about this beforehand. If they all had the divine gift of Forge wise, making them good with tools, would it not then become a part of every single dwarf's culture?
Right, probably more so than you even imagine in traditional D&D, where it's like, they're all pretty good. That would be like everything in dwarf culture would be about.
It's like freaking God came down and said, use this hammer.
Right, it wasn't like a parable or something. It's like, no, we know for a fact that like Moradin was like, here's how to use forge tools, masons and smiths, and that's your duty in the world. I was skipping around a bit, but next level 88 mentions crit fails and successes affect every roll. Now, I thought that was weird and hard to swallow, and also, boy, sorry for all the meme makers out there. And people who like to argue about memes. It's just like, nope, that is the case now.
So like the problem with that now is, one, I mean,
the game just became incredibly easy, because if you have like, no,
I'm thinking the other way, right? If like thinking like for whatever reason you're doing like an average to routine task, but you have a DM that requires you to make a check, you can fail that check now, even if it's walking across the room. You rolled a 1.
That's true.
You failed to walk across the room. You rolled a 1.
Which sounds silly, but could, for even in our group, like our Tuesday night group, that would probably be like a fun, memorable experience, right? Because somebody would ham it up or like make it part of the story in a fun way.
Well, I mean, as a GM, like, I wouldn't ask for roles that are inane like that, but there are GMs that do that, right? It's definitely...
Well, imagine this, say you go to a big fancy gala and the player's like, I want to just like, just make when I walk across the room, I want it to look, I just want it to be amazing or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, give me a performance check. Then they roll 1. It's like, you step on the hem of your dress and just trip and knock over a waiter carrying a thing of champagne, and it spills all over like the Duchess and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that now it became part of the story in a memorable way. You know what? Actually, one last, before I forget about the crit fails and successes. If you notice, that only applies to player characters, which means because all those 3 tests have been codified into what's called a D20 test with a capital T now: ability checks, attacks, and saving throws.
Mm-hmm.
And a natural 20 or 1 is only when a player character makes a test. So NPCs and monsters can no longer crit attack your players.
Yeah, but does that mean they can succeed on a 1 though? Like they can wallop you on a 1?
What do you mean?
If your monster
yes, I suppose, yeah. Like if it had a high enough attack bonus, yeah, I
gets a
suppose
plus
so.
15 hit, you've got, you know,
Which is kind of cool, you know. I didn't think of that, but yeah, I can get on board with that.
so all elves live to 750 years. I don't know if that's the same as the player's handbook or if they upped it a little bit. For some reason,
I think it was
like
750 in there.
I felt like for some reason, like the elves lived to one age, but then dark elves lived a little longer for some
You know what? Now that I think about it, elves might be 500 and dwarves are like 350. And yeah, I think you're right. Like it was like high elves live for like a longer
The
time.
dark elves were living longer for some reason.
Speaking of which, all the elves get spells tailored to the lineage, whether they're drow, high, or wood.
Yeah. All elves get spells. All celestials get spells. All tieflings get spells.
You get spells. You get spells. Everybody
Everybody's getting
man.
spells.
Tons of backgrounds. Like I saw at least one that's like you just get the magic initiate feat.
Gnomes get spells as well. So that's part of it. And gnomes live longer than dwarves.
That's interesting.
And, you know, in case
halflings are pretty long lived.
Yeah, that I think it used to.
And
be
you know,
like,
and there again, there's like almost like a one of those weird. It's not bestowed by the gods, but even like naturally stealthy. It's like, why are they?
Well, here's the thing: both elves and halflings have that, but they're just like, we're just not going to talk about it. We're just going to give it to them and move on. Yes, it's feats, feats instead of background features. Which
again, I get, man. It's like I fought for the longest time because it's like, but it's a role playing thing, blah blah blah. But it's like, look, people that role play are going to role play anyway. Like, you know, like again, my most fun group is our Tuesday night group, so I often think of that as examples. But like, you know, if one of us was playing an acolyte, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, I have a feature where I can go to the church. You would just do that, right? Because you're role playing. So I totally get tying some kind of benefit to it.
I guess I would say one of the interesting changes is there are no half races. Basically, what it just says now, you want to play a half orc, take a look at the orc, look at the human, and swap out the things you want from each so that you have the same number. You can't have everything, but you can. I think you can mix and match.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, just any two races.
Yeah, any two races, so you can do that. It's kind of cool. Like I like the idea of playing like an infernal dwarf or
a dwelf.
What? No, not that. Anything but that. That's an abomination.
But yeah, I think that's a pretty elegant, clever way of doing it, right? By sort of codifying things more of just like, here's what an origin is. It's an ability score increase, which are in there now in backgrounds, like, you know, a certain number of skills / tools / language and a feat. So yeah, you can mix and match a lot. I think that's pretty cool.
I like you also like the narrative benefits, you know, the RP benefits from the backgrounds that you don't get anymore, that they've all been replaced by feats.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so it does say, and I hate this wish-washy language of 5e where it's like, here's how everything is, how we put it, but you know, you don't like it, just change it, right, to make whatever you want to make. Mm-hmm. So if you want your acolyte to get a +2 to strength and a +1 to con, then that's where you can put your bonuses. To me, it's just weird. Why include it at all? Like, just like,
I guess I could see both ways, because it's like, well, here's what we imagined when we designed it of what an acolyte is. But but like maybe you're an acolyte of some entity that values just strength, and it's like, I don't need to be wise or smart. I just, it's like I just trust in the dogma of whatever, that's put the robe on, and now I'm an acolyte. I guess you'd be more of a cultist.
I think like Pathfinder 2e just did it better, and it's like they can't just. I guess they don't feel like they could just do that now because they've done it. So like if this was Pathfinder, right, you would get some stat adjustments from your race, and usually it's like 2 stats or a choice between two stats and a single stat, and then your background would give you, maybe a set stat and then a choice of a stat, and then you'd have your ancestry or is it your ancestry or class? But there's like 3 different places that he gets our adjustments from. Like, so I would like the idea of you have a background, you have a culture, and then you have a race, right?
Yeah.
And like your culture might be where you get some stat adjustments, and your background might be as well, with maybe a little bit of wiggle room.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So all the components give you some sort of stat thing, which sort of lets you customize that. Like you're saying, it's like, well, maybe from your acolyte, like I imagine, like, they would have this stat. So I'm putting, like you can just put it anywhere.
And I like the idea that you could have had a priest upbringing, before, without any spellcasting. Now, the way it is, I guess you could just trade it out for something else. But there's something to be said for a character that grew up in the church and they know how the church works and they know all the ceremonies and how the hierarchy works and all the history, but they're not actually a priest.
Yes and no. I mean, I can buy in the fantasy and just thinking like, well, if you went to seminary and learned some secret prayers and things that are in, it's like, oh, these are in the like Apocrypha or whatever. It's like, well, then I know a couple of, because that's why I look at divine magic. It's like it's prayer, right? And it's like, well, I know it'd be like, if I say a Hail Mary, I know like sacred flame will come down from the sky and smite my enemies or whatever the heck, It's just
like unless they change it, because not all priests in D&D are spellcasters. Like you can run into someone that is just a clergy person and they have no access to magic.
Yeah, but if you're a player character, it's like, I want the magic.
Zergrim, so there are no variant humans anymore, right? Humans are the same as every other race. No, actually, you get those bonuses are what you said they are, but they don't come from your race. They come from your background.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Right.
It has nothing to do with your race. It's just your background. And they added some interesting ones in here. Like cultists. We finally get a cultist. And, a guard. Gladiator is its own. Guide is another one.
Farmer is one.
Farmer is another one.
And I like that one. The default language is Halfling, which again just plays into the same like cultural stereotype of D&D that they're just agrarian folk. It's but whatever.
Well, that's
why they're playtest folk.
Yeah, it is play. So since we're jumping all over here around here, I'm sorry,
yeah,
guys.
Sure, yeah, why not?
But so from your background, you're going to get your ability scores, your skill proficiencies, your tool proficiency, your language, and your feat. And I kind of hate the language that's automatically tied to it. It's just weird. It's just odd to me that obviously some of them make sense. Like, okay, so if you're an acolyte, you're involved with a church and it's celestial. But what if it's not a good church? What if you worship Asmodeus or Baal or Bane or one of the dark gods? Why would you speak celestial unless know your enemies? Language. Artisan is gnomish. So again, in their effort to remove and strip cultural things from the game, they're literally just putting it back in other places.
I think that, like you said it before, we already touched on it. It's like, just, I wouldn't even give I don't know. I guess it must be tough for them because it's like, well, we're looking at it from the point of like experienced players for whom those concepts, like I could see somebody playing 5e doesn't even know what an acolyte is. You know what I mean? Like never even came across that word before. So it's like, well, this is sort of like the baseline idea of what we mean as an acolyte.
If you thought like orcs in D&D are racist before, right? Take a look at the language you get for being a gladiator.
What is it?
Orc.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Trying to say?
Yeah, I'm not saying anything. They fixed that that's for sure. Right. Yeah. Nailed it.
And this is, this kind of dovetails with what, like a more broad point I want to make is like, and we mentioned it when they first started talking about, this evolution thing. It's like, well, will they update the SRD or not? And like, what does that mean? Because that's another aspect that we have to think about. Is like, we're third-party creators, right? And like, I don't know if they will or not. I don't think they're going to update it. But like looking at it now, it's like, well, I don't think it really matters. And it kind of reinvigorated my own desire to keep, to make as a creator. She's like, man, spoiler alert, we go through ups and downs sometimes. We're just like, I'm just like, I don't even know if I care about this stuff. So it's like kind of cool because we can still do that, and it kind of is exciting. It's like, wow, now it's like acceptable to like work feats into backgrounds. That makes the appeal of making backgrounds a lot more exciting to me.
Yeah, well, so, and again, like, all right, Thomas Fisher 24, option 3 would cover the circumstances which you pick a sample background and customize, which I kind of briefly mentioned, but I might not have mentioned it or articulated it very well. I feel like more than anything, that's what's going to happen, right? You're like, they have these samples, people are going to pick the samples, and they're going to change the ability scores to optimize it towards their character, more than likely. They're going to take a language that makes sense, and maybe they're going to pick a feat that makes sense. One of the other first level feats, like if I'm playing a pious person who was brought up in the church, but I don't want my character to cast spells, maybe I take tough instead or something else as an option. So there's going to be a lot of that going on.
And also, to be fair, yes, for sure, it's going to be overwhelmingly appealing to like optimizer, which there's nothing wrong with it. But I can, myself as a player, it's like I can see having, a pretty like a specific idea for a character and what their background was, and like kind of constructing it in a thoughtful way too. That's like, oh, this seems, even if it's not like, like if it was like Vent, right, where it's like his, his dump stat is not intelligence and things like that. So, I could see it coming into play that way too. And it's sort of exciting. So anyway, sorry.
No, for sure. That's absolutely. Sometimes when I play, in the past, when I've played races that were not optimal for the character classes, I would go for a more even spread of stats than trying to get my maximum 16s or whatever. So you can still lean into that stuff if you want. Like I said, there's just some wonky things. It's like if you're a soldier, your language of choice, the language you would know, out of a box is Goblin. So, some of it is just a little silly. But again, this is the first document. They're gonna, it's gonna go through all kinds of play testing. I will say one of the things that I did get from the spells. One of the things that I did get for the spells, from reading it about spells, is that there's 3 types of magics now. It's arcane, divine, and primal. I thought that might make you happy. That seems like a callback to
for sure. I'm into that.
And also it simplifies it, right? And kind of to like what I was saying before, how I used to like when it was separated by spell levels. Well, now if they probably won't separate it. It'll just be like alphabetical, and then it'll have the tag of this is a primal spell, this is the divine spell. But it might make it easier in the digital versions, where maybe if that's a tag, that I can just search my primal spells or my divine spells.
Oh, they even had the spell lists in this document, I think, by
for first level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To just give you an idea and stuff.
And then they got a list of languages, what they consider standard languages, who would speak it, rare languages, who would speak it.
If you notice, there's 2 pretty significant inclusions on their rare languages, which are open to, I believe, is the background. It's like, pick one of the standard or rare languages. It also has Thieves' Cant and Druidic on there, which have never been learnable outside of being a druid or a rogue.
Yeah. Well, the criminal background does have Thieves' Cant on it as the language. I don't know if I saw Druid on any of them. Although if you're a sailor, you will speak Primordial automatically.
Well, all those sea shanties are sung in Aquan.
Yeah. Who knew?
They're beautiful in the native Aquan.
Feats are all have level indicators now, so you can swap out any ones.
And again, we see that the things are just like codified more. It's just like there's a lot more structure to it. It's like prerequisite, repeatable. They often have like the bold headers and things of like, different, like you get 2 different distinct things.
It's very important too. Like, I know a lot of people were probably really worried about this, because Lucky was always very underpowered. Now Lucky, you get luck points. You have a number of luck points equal to your proficiency bonus. You can spend the points as on benefits below and regain your expended luck points when you finish a long rest. So it's so you start off with less of them, but you'll get more as things go on. You can immediately, after you roll a d20 for a d20 test, can spend a luck point to give yourself advantage on the roll, and disadvantage when a creature rolls a d20 or attack roll against you. You can spend 1 luck point to impose disadvantage on the roll. So yes, our Lucky has improved. Thank God.
That's always been a house rule for me, for players to use their inspiration to give disadvantage. Basically that. Why is there a asterisk after so many things in these?
Because I think it references the rules down below.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, because they're all like, like long rest, or like capitalized the things in the glossary.
So I wonder if this changes it so that now that you can't crit with spells, because like they call out critical hits for weapons. Like, all weapons have weapons and unarmed strikes have a special feature for player characters. Critical hits, if the player rolls a 20 on the attack roll with a weapon or an armed strike, the attack is also a critical hit. So that's kind of cool, and it's just like crits how they always are.
Let's see, because there's a rolling a 20 thing too.
Yeah, anytime you roll 20,
that's only about succeeding. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't for spells. I mean, the way it's worded here.
Yeah, unless something comes out later, we'll see.
Maybe and it could have just been an oversight. Again, it's just a playtest thing. It might have been like, maybe they send it out, or send it to press. Somebody in the team's like, oh shit, you might be watching right now and realizing that. I'm sure people elsewhere have picked it apart.
Well, and the biggest problem, like, we've tried to tweak the crits.
Obtuse Habit says in the video they mentioned they are trying to make it a more martial,
and that makes sense.
That's kind of cool, a way to balance that out a little bit.
So we've had not a problem, but we've tried to tweak critical hits in our own games, that if you roll a 20, you get a crit, and then you roll 2 dice, or however many dice, but then you roll lower than you would have if you had just rolled better with 1 attack, right? Which is pretty lame for a crit. So we've experimented with going, okay, well, you get max damage, on the first one, then you roll the other. But the problem with that is sneak attack greatly inflates that towards the rogues by such a high number. Mm-hmm. Paladins with smite, and then any spellcaster ever that rolls a d20 to attack. It just blows out of the water what your fighter can do, because your fighter and a lot of your other martials are based off of making more attacks in a round than other classes.
So that's cool too. I like that little development. I think that works. I haven't
played a ton of Pathfinder and Pathfinder 2e, but it does look better, but not necessarily all in the right direction. I feel like there's some things that Pathfinder 2e actually did better, and we were talking about this before we went live. And I don't know if it's like, if you're wizards, you can't mimic what they did because you're wizards, right? You are D&D. Right. You're just going to be accused of stealing it, even if their whole game came from D&D. But, so I feel like being in Dungeons and Dragons is sometimes a very terrible position to be in the sense that you are the bar. Like, every RPG that ever comes out is going to be measured against you. And there are certain things that get in the way of D&D, like alignment is a sacred cow that I don't like. I feel like they want to get rid of it, but they don't feel like they can. And some other things,
I feel like it just wouldn't be that hard to make it relevant in a cool way if they wanted. And who knows, maybe it will in this. We might get a UA packet all about alignment that's like 20 pages of different. I don't know.
I don't like things in the game that don't actually really do anything. Like I've heard, well, it's a good role playing tool. Is it though? Really? Like I feel like your personality traits, flaws, and ideals are just as good, if not better.
Yeah.
Or like,
Well, that's what I'm saying. They might gamify it like they have here
Yeah.
with the backgrounds, where it's like that's the exact same thing. Where it's like, yeah, it's a role playing trait, and like, okay.
So
How often did that come up?
I was reading some some of the chat. Hey, Complacent Badger.
Oh wow, complacent badger.
I haven't
Oh boy,
seen that
I
name
don't
in a
know
long time.
if he's changed, but in the one D&D, feats won't be optional anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, that's definitely. But we've seen that kind of creeping up with each thing that they put out.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, if you're starting to bake it into the backgrounds,
Right.
it's not
Yeah.
very optional anymore, which is fine. Like, and that's the other thing. Like, there is no pretense anymore. Like, if you don't want to play a high fantasy, high magic game, play something else. Right? Like,
I feel like that
Morkborg is
most
an awesome game.
Yeah. Yes. That is most impactful because I think about this a lot and interact with people and see these discussions a lot. It most impacts DMs who want to run that kind of game and they just can't find enough players who want to play that kind of game because it's like, again, we were kind of talking about that beforehand. It's like you give a kid keys to the candy store, but or it's like, or you could go into this like old dusty, crap, thrift store or whatever. Which one do you want to go in? It's like, well, yeah, I want to play this game where it's like at first level I'm casting spells and it's like the fantasy in my mind is being displayed right away and we're doing all this fantastical stuff.
Well, I will say I think that's a little unfair because I do feel like there's players that like to be tested as the player and not as the character. 5e and Pathfinder games test the characters more so than they test the players. It's about what those can do. Where when you're playing an OSR game or very rules lights games, it's more about what you can do creatively as the player to overcome obstacles. And it's kind of a back and forth with the GM where in a game like 5e, it's everything is codified a lot more. You have a lot more abilities to draw upon. So I feel like you're less likely to come at those challenges from different ways.
Hey, what? Maybe I'm thinking. Like, I guess I'm thinking of in terms of like being a DM.
Mm-hmm.
That I actually like that because because I know players do tend to like look at their character sheets for answers, right? So it's like, well, when they look down and it's like, oh man, I have like all this crazy cool stuff I can do. That's sort of like fun for me as a DM because it keeps me on my toes. Like, oh, it's gonna be like that. Okay, cool. Like, I'll roll with it. I mean, I like when things get out of control sometimes.
And when I say that, I'm not saying one method is better than the other.
Right.
It's a preference, right? And
sure.
And if you're playing an OSR game with D&D Essentials or Morkborg or whatever you're playing,
an earlier edition of D&D or whatever,
like those players are more than likely were drawn to play that game. So it's easy to think about from the GM stance where like they want to have this gritty and dark game, and that's why they want to restrict everything. But more than likely, they're going to draw the players that want to play those games, so they're going to have their own motives and reasons for wanting to play them. But, it's a very long way of just saying, look, if you want a grittier game that is not high magic, you're going to have to look elsewhere because 5e was already that way, and it's just going further and further into that.
And I guess it just touches on like what we mention often of just like, there's like a desire from those people. It's like, but I want that to be the coolest thing that everybody wants. It's like, they just don't though. Yeah. You know what I mean? like people just respond more to exciting things like that. That's why it's so popular of a game. And they have tremendous marketing stuff too. Now, we didn't set a time limit per se, but it is getting close to an hour. And I thought maybe, we were just sort of bouncing around the UA. There was several other cool, pretty awesome announcements from the Wizards Presents thing. I don't know if you wanted to touch on
I don't know if you're on a time limit, but
I'm not. I mean, I can hang in. Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, I'll hang in.
So there's a couple other things. One of the things that I think is definitely worth talking about is inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got a section for gaining inspiration, only one at a time, and losing inspiration. So basically, when you get a 20, you now gain inspiration. You can only have one at a time, but if you have it and you gain it, you can give it to another player that doesn't have it.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh,
after a
okay.
long rest, you lose your inspiration. So this does a couple cool things, in my opinion. It
Mm-hmm.
pushes players to use their inspiration more often. I've definitely seen players that will hoard it and not want to spend it. This motivates them. And two, this is, in my opinion, them responding to the fact that they created a specific way to use inspiration in your games and nobody does. So they're
Yeah.
like, maybe we should do it differently because this isn't working for anybody.
Right. For sure. Yeah, you know me, I love games with like finite resources that go away, or like in Cypher, it's like you can only carry two. So it's like, well, hopefully your DM or your GM or whatever keeps them flowing. So anything that encourages players to use those things, potions or just anything, I love it. Right. So yeah, man, use it, that inspiration, and remind you it's like you get it, you don't want to lose it. And it's like, why not? And I'm not one of, it's like, again, you've played with me many times. I'm certainly not somebody that hoards stuff, and I don't think there's any like wasted rolls, like when people are like, oh man, I wasted like my inspiration or a good 20 on like a cooking set rolls. Like, that's not a waste. You succeeded in an awesome degree at that thing. So it's like, yeah, use it for anything that you think would be really cool to succeed at. Use it. Especially if it's something quirky like that or specific to your character that maybe isn't like in the heat of combat. Maybe you'll just gain inspiration right back because it was inspiration worthy, right?
So looking at the arcane spells, I do notice something that has me wondering about what they're going to do.
Oh, well, real quick, next level 88 mentioned. Yeah, we touched on that earlier, right away, actually, because the humans, there's several feats and racial traits and stuff that interact with inspiration that give the players the agency to generate it.
So looking at the arcane list, there's something missing on the cantrips.
Eldritch Bolt, Eldritch Blast.
There's no Eldritch Blast, so I wonder if
I
this is
want to
going to be a
say
Warlock
Eldritch
ability.
Blast isn't in the SRD either. Oddly enough, I'm gonna look it up right now, but I don't think it is.
Oh, yeah. So it makes me wonder if they're going to do something, make some changes with the Warlock, make the Warlock more interesting. Hopefully, maybe they're tired of the Eldritch Blast memes.
No, it is. Sorry, I was as I was looking up, I was like, I don't think it is, but it would be weird if it isn't. Yeah, who knows? Maybe it's weird that it's not there. Maybe it'll be a different power source. Something different. I don't know what that would be.
Well, they called out the Warlock being part of the
Oh, you know
arcane.
what? Maybe they'll make the Warlock more like the 3.5, where like Eldritch Blast was just a class feature.
Yeah.
And then there was different ways, like you could make it a cube, or all the shit you can do now. You make it push people, pull people in there. Maybe they'll make it that. They'll just lean into it. It's like, oh, you thought you read an Eldritch Blast a lot before. Now it's just a class feature. I bet you they will. And maybe they'll even have things like, if you pick a pack to like, it'll change the type of damage it is. I could see something like that.
Yeah. So Thomas Fisher says, I believe they said there would be class specific spell lists as well. That seems more confusing if they're going to do arcane, divine, and primal, and then spell lists for the individual classes as well. I thought I read something where it just said that like when you get your spells, like you would just pull from your power source. But like I just got this thing today and read through it. So
and again, it's the very first playtest, which is it's like they're not sure either. It's like, well, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. So one of the cool things they're talking about doing now too is they're talking about doing bundles where they're going to now finally going to offer digital, like everybody else is doing forever, alongside physical products. So if you get I believe so, it seemed like if you get the physical version, you'll also get the digital version. Is that, or is it? Are they?
Well, I think you can buy them individually, but they're also bundled. Like where if you get, and the interesting thing about that is they're earmarked for the D&D store, which is totally new. Like early, I don't even know if it's live now. Earlier it was like under construction still, but it's like an official store. on the D&D's official website, not D&D Beyond. It interacts with that, and that if you buy the physical, if you pre-order the physical Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, it's bundled with the Unlock on D&D Beyond, which will get released early because the book comes out on December 6th, but you could get it early release November 22nd.
Yeah,
and the links to all that stuff's in the post on our website.
So moving into some other things, before we do, just want to mention the link to the D&D Beyond to get take part in the playtest is in the description. Also, our sponsor Easy Roller Dice, you'll find a link to their store and a one-time promo code for 25% off that you can check out as well. They're talking about expanding D&D Beyond into a VTT 3. It's going to be 3D. It looks. I was watching the video. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, you can even, as I understand it, like say you got the Dragonlance adventure and there's like, I don't know, like a Temple of Tiamat or Techesis or whatever. It'll have the 3D map and all that, but then you could also like take it apart. Like basically you have the assets elements to it. Yeah, and you could like make your own dungeon with that stuff. So I imagine like as you unlock more adventures, it would just also build your asset library so you can make all kinds of crazy shit.
And I also like the angle, the camera angle they're using.
Yeah.
They call it, I forget the specific, some kind of tilt. Shift tilt angle. And it is definitely designed for like the way people are playing virtually now. And I do like the fact that they're using minis and not trying to make it like a video game or or animated things per se. But it's still like, no, we're gonna bring you your tabletop and into a virtual space. Because I think as cool as that is, I'm still gonna sit around the table and play with my friends where I can.
Yeah. They even in one of the promo images, it was somebody had the Shadow of the Dragon Queen open. I think it was like some kind of big temple, and you could see the map in the book, and then on the screen was that same map, but like with that tilt, so it's like all 3D and everything. I was like, and it looked just like it, except it was like.
Well, you know what, Gareth from DMG Info had been working on, and I don't know if he kind of died off or what. I haven't seen anything, but he was doing something where he would do backdrops, and then he would do a floor piece, and it was shaped like the camera angle. So it was a side view of what you would see if you're looking at it on a stream or looking at it on in a Zoom call or whatever.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Like the top-down view.
That's pretty awesome.
So the shift tilt actually made me think of that. I was like, they took your idea, but that was physical terrain and physical minis.
Like we mentioned, the 3D environment that they're working on sounds pretty sweet. I don't know. I still, who knows? I'll give it a shot. But that's also tied into not a new announcement, but I guess the release date. We mentioned it for the Dragonlance stuff, which is Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. And the alternate cover for that is by far my favorite of all the 5e books I've seen, because it's got the main badass of all time on the cover, Lord Soth, who's just one of my favorite fantasy villains. So it's pretty sweet to see him on the cover, which plunges adventurers into the world of Krynn. And like the original DL module series, which I played through as a kid, I think I was like 16 of them or something.
Yeah.
This iteration includes war game, sort of like DL 11 Dragons of Glory, called Dragonlance Warriors of Krynn, which is a mass battle board game that's even more cool than the original thing because it's designed to interact with it. So like your players from the tabletop campaign are making the war decisions in this game, and like the board game has different options for the outcome of that affect the tabletop campaign, which I was like, that's pretty awesome, because I do love a good war story, and that's like you get the D&D adventure and it's actually like a war story. Like it's like you're in the War of the Lance. You're not just like which is kind of almost makes it cooler in a way, or just as cool as you're like, oh, you're not the heroes of the Lance. It's like, yeah, they're off doing all this adventure stuff. It's like, we got to fight the war. Like you're fighting the war of the lances in the campaign. I'm all in on that. That sounds awesome to me.
It'll definitely be interesting to see what direction they go with it. I've probably read more Dragonlance books and novels than I've read any others.
I don't know. There's a lot of Forgotten Realms ones too, man.
There is
back in the day, but Dragonlance, it just was a compelling story. Plus the War of the Lances.
I think I read like almost every single Dragonlance book except for the twin stuff. For some reason, like that was everyone's favorites when we were kids growing up, and those are the ones that I didn't read. I don't know why.
I don't know if I had. I mean, the original three, of course, were just amazing.
They had so many spin-off novels.
I liked Weasel's Luck a lot. I remember that one impacted me a lot. I thought that was cool.
There was two of those, I believe. Like, it was like a 2-part series. So what else do they have coming out?
Oh, so probably the most big news I think that all players will be interested in is the 2023 release schedule, and man, I'm excited for this. So we got, again, you can go over on the website and check that out. And it's funny, quick before we get into that, of how we like Nerdarchy just has so much content of like videos and posts that like going through this stuff, and I'll mention one in particular. There's the book of many things in Q3 is a collection of creatures, locations, and goodies connected to the mysterious deck of many things. Just something even as specific as that. It's like we have a whole bunch of video and posts about like adventure hooks and how to run a campaign based on the deck of many things, which that book is going to be about in Q3 next year. So that sounds cool. And again, it's like I love when they just like lean into like, yeah, this is the cool D&D stuff, like deck of many things, and like don't be afraid of it. Just go with it, man. It's fun. But before that, in the first quarter of 2023, we'll get Keys from the Golden Vault, which is described as an Ocean's 11 meets D&D in a book of short adventures revolving around heists. That sounds really fun, right? What do you think about that?
So they're revisiting Dragon Heist, but making it into an anthology and shorter adventures.
No, that you actually the heist in that is that it's not your that's often been cited as like a bad title thing. It's a great adventure, but you are not doing any heisting in that adventure much at all.
Yeah. So they're correcting that problem. You get heist
now. This is going to be awesome, I think. Big B presents Glory of the Giants. So we don't have to wonder anymore. What about all that giant themed stuff? And I guess you were even in one of the recent videos speculating. I wonder what D&D character they'll lean into for that. Big B, which is cool because why not, right? You get to learn more about Big B. And it's going to be in the style of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, which is awesome. So it'll just make all those giants in your game cool that people have always wanted, right?
Did Nate cover Big B when he did his Wizards of Distinction?
He did. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Big B, Leomund, and a few others even went outside D&D. Yeah. Let's see. Then I mentioned Q3. You get Book of Many Things, which kind of tied into. There was like some of that stuff in the UA just recently, right? Like card magic and whatnot.
Yeah.
Q3. Going back 10 years now with the Phandelver campaign. It's in quotes. I imagine it'll probably have a cooler name. Just expanding the classic Lost Mine of Phandelver into a full campaign that is also has a cosmic horror theme. So I thought that was that's pretty sweet, right? Like I've played in that adventure several times myself, and kind of neat to see that they're revisiting it. And then the big closing out the year, Q4 with Planescape. In case anybody, which I'd imagine will probably be in a slipcase thing like Spelljammer, maybe. I don't know.
There's a lot to cover. I could definitely see that because you could literally do Sigil as a book, with the player options. You could do Planescape monsters, and then you could do an adventure.
That's exactly as described. The legendary setting returns, like Spelljammer Adventures to Space. Fans can explore Sigil City of Doors with a setting guide, a bestiary, and an adventure in one package. It's described. So, but wouldn't be surprised. And then we end up the post with the gallery like we always do from press briefing. I just slap all the promo images they send me up there because why not? They sent them, right? So it's a lot of Dragonlance stuff where you can see that dope cover with Lord South on it over on the website. And just some epic art of dragon armies clashing on the fields of battle, which looks pretty sweet.
Yeah, weren't they teasing Dragonlance in the last one, but it was less specific, I would say, the less
In the
briefing.
last.
Some of the imagery I remember.
Oh no, that was when that trailer came out.
Oh, yeah.
It was explicitly announced. I think it was just this time it was like more the date because I was like, it didn't really seem anything new. That board game and all that. The art was, they discussed that, and I didn't. The other rest of the event was about things I really wasn't super interested in or thought our audience wouldn't, which is a lot of Magic the Gathering thing. Although it is cool, it's like they're expanding like Warhammer 40K set for Magic the Gathering, a Doctor Who set for Magic the Gathering. So that's pretty interesting.
Does any of that appeal to you? Because I know you sometimes play Magic.
I mean, yeah, I love Magic the Gathering, and some sets I like, some I don't. I mean, usually when I'm making decks and playing, I just am looking for cards that do the things that I want them to do. So I don't, like I only really pay attention to the set if it's like in the rotation, like whether it's standard or not. Although I will say, as a D&D fan, I was, like bound and determined to like that set, and I have many decks that are just, themed around D&D. One of my favorite decks is about a Rust Monster, which is like a common crap card, but I love killing people with the Rust Monster in that game.
Well, as a GM, I can definitely empathize with that because there's nothing in the old days. There was nothing more fun than wrecking your party with Rust monsters.
Yeah. I haven't looked at chat in a while. Let's see. We're gonna see. Complacent Badger says, nope, they've changed and they use feats in their game. That's cool. Spells in your team. I believe they still do V-class. So, the steep subscription model. I don't know. I could imagine it being more like an app because it's like that they want people to probably just be like what do you call it?
My concern would actually be that it is actually cheap in the beginning, and so they can drive everyone else out of business, and then they raise the price after they've cornered the market.
Well, I mean, presumably they want you to buy the content to use in it because it's like, yes, you get those assets, but which probably means it's only usable with that stuff. So you have to buy something to even have any assets. Maybe, I don't know. We're just totally speculating. Who knows? No idea. I don't really care because that doesn't really appeal to me per se. But when I might check it out and be like, oh, this is really neat. I want this. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at it, but at the end of the day, us personally, we tend to play Theater of the Mind. We play online, or if we're playing in person, we're using minis and terrain more.
That being said, if it's like super easy to make like really cool things and use and doesn't take a lot of time, or like some of those things are just like you can do a lot with them if you spend a tremendous amount of time. If you're a programmer. Yeah, right. And it's like if it's like that, I probably won't use it. But if it's real easy to just kind of plop things around and make cool stuff, I might check it out.
So I think that's pretty much everything we know right now. This is what we're looking at. Maybe we'll update things as it goes along as they drop more of the releases and check it out. Like, right now there isn't even really enough to do an actual playtest yet. So all you can do is really look at it until until they give some more classes and stuff like that to actually put together characters and begin playing in what 5e is to become.
Yeah. But I would encourage people to keep an eye out and like when they do those surveys and stuff, because you might not like where it ends up, but they do take all that data into consideration. So if there's things you feel strongly about, then let them know.
Yeah, for sure. And D&D Beyond is no longer a sponsor of ours, but I will say like their stuff does make it a lot easier. And if you didn't have a subscription before, at least get the free one because they've been dropping a lot of content there. It seems like every release comes with a free D&D Beyond release of content as well. So it's probably worth it just to have the free subscription just for that. They did the Vecna, they did the Spelljammer. I think Radiant Citadel, they released the some of that
first chapter free. Of that. Yeah. They got this playtest, which they'll probably do similar for all those UAs of just like claiming it through D&D.
Yeah, and it feels like they're trying to go into more interesting ways with the content, and so it's not just a repeat of something you're going to buy, but like something that's going to be a value add. Like you can only get this here, and by itself it is actually kind of cool. but it'll work even better if you have the other thing too, which, I always like that kind of stuff. Even when we put stuff out, like, I'm always leaning towards that's how we should do things. It should be usable the way it is, and act to enhance something that we already have in our store to sell. But with that, thanks everyone for hanging out with us. We really do appreciate it. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.